The 7 who feel the shift. If this finds you, you're already late. Try this now, before I explain, before you decide whether this is for you. For the next 60 seconds, see if you can do one simple thing. Don't follow your thoughts. Do not chase them. When a thought arises, label it thinking and let it pass like a cloud. If another thought pulls at you, gently say thinking again and let it pass. Your job for 60 seconds is not to empty your mind perfectly. Your job is only to notice whether you are the thinker or the one noticing the thinker. If that sounded impossible, you already felt the edge of what I'm going to describe. If it felt strange but possible, you've just touched the doorway. If it felt quiet and obvious, listen closely. This message is for you in a different way. Either way, stay with me. The title you heard is not clickbait. The 7 who feel the shift. If this finds you, you're already late. Late to noticing, not late to becoming. There's an urgency here. Not panic, but the kind that comes when a new climate arrives and a few people sense the weather before the towns do. Some of you feel a friction between the running stream of thought and a quieter presence that observes it. That friction is the first proof. It's uncomfortable, humbling, sometimes liberating. It signals that the internal architecture of identity is shifting. Here's the central claim in one sentence. Most of what your life has built around, your inner commentary, your habitual stories, the default narrator, is not the origin of you. It's a stream that runs in awareness. This is not a belief to accept blindly. It's an experiment you can test, and a set of practices you can apply to measure change. If you want the worksheet for these practices, step-by-step prompts, timing, and a reality response journal template, there's a link in the description below. Why this matters now. For decades, researchers exploring the relationship between brain activity and conscious awareness have found a surprising lag. The brain often initiates a movement or forms the precursors of a decision before you become consciously aware of intending it. Benjamin Libet and others described experiments where measurable signals in the brain precede the subjective sense of choosing. That doesn't settle philosophical debates about free will. Interpretations vary. What those results do suggest is this: conscious awareness often seems to follow, not originate, certain micro-actions of the brain. That scientific observation lines up with a phenomenological observation many contemplative traditions have been pointing to for millennia. Thought tends to arise on its own like weather, and there's an awareness in which weather happens. Modern phrasing calls this non-identification, a practice of noticing thoughts as events, not commands. Neuroscience gives us a tentative, useful frame. Some cognitive processes are upstream of conscious recognition. We can use that fact to design simple, verifiable practices. 3 metaphors will guide us, because metaphors ground strange claims. Radio. Thoughts broadcast like stations. You can tune in without being the station. Clouds. Thoughts pass across a sky of awareness. The sky is not the cloud. Frequency. Your baseline sense of self has a frequency. Practices shift the tuning so different patterns of events begin to resonate with you. You won't become immune to thoughts. The point is to learn you are the space in which thoughts happen, and that this space can change how reality responds. The shift shows first in people who strain against the mismatch between automatic thinking and a nascent inner sensing. I call them the 7. Each is an archetype, someone you might recognize in yourself, a friend, or a colleague. For each archetype, I'll name the sign you'll recognize, paint a short image, give a micro-practice you can do right away with exact timing, and tell you one early indicator that the practice is working. Before we go through them, a short verification experiment, because this is not hypothetical. Sit for 30 seconds and watch your chest. Breathe normally. Every time a sentence arises, I should do this, I'm late, this is silly, label it thinking and let it pass. No need to argue or push the thought away. After 30 seconds, ask yourself, Was there a gap between the thought and the observing voice that labeled it? That little gap is your first data point. Now, meet the 7. Listen for which one feels like home. 1. The overthinker. Sign: your mind circles the same problem like a dog pacing a room. Image: you sit at a work desk while your head runs through scenarios, pros and cons, worst-case edits. Analysis becomes a loop that steals sleep and steals presence. Micro-practice. Thought labeling. Set a timer for 5 minutes each morning. When a thought appears, silently say, thinking. If urges to elaborate come, say, story for narratives, remembering for recollections, planning for future constructions. The rule is do not engage beyond the label. Let the label be the end point. Time frame: 5 minutes daily for 7 days. Indicator of change: the loop shortens. Instead of spiraling for 30 minutes, you notice 5-minute interruptions where thinking is labeled and passes. The emotional tone softens. Anxiety about solutions often drops because the urge to fix everything in thought loosens. Why this matters: overthinking feels like productivity. We think analyzing more equals better outcomes, but the habit replays old recompilations of fear and past conditioning. Labeling creates a reflective distance and, crucially, lets you test whether the thinking is generative or merely repetitive. 2. The prepared reactor. Sign: you find yourself rehearsing responses, bracing for impact, ready to defend before the conversation starts. Image: standing in a conversation you haven't yet had, you feel muscles tighten and your mind string together rebuttals and preemptive explanations. You call it being ready. It shows up as reactivity. Micro-practice. The 60-second not thinking anchor. Twice daily, place one hand on your heart and the other on your belly. For 60 seconds, breathe naturally and allow thoughts to surface. Each time a reactive or rehearsed thought arrives, simply name it reacting and return to the sensation of breath beneath your palms. Do not remove the hands until the minute finishes. Time frame: 1 minute, twice per day for 14 days. Indicator of change. You notice a pause before automatic retorts. That pause is small at first, just half a beat, but it shows up at conversations and prevents the automatic launch of a script. The energy in your chest feels less tense. Responses become chosen rather than automatic. Why this works: placing hands on the heart and belly anchors attention in the body. The embodied focus slows down the cascade of automatic responses enough for awareness to register the reactive thought. Experiments by groups like HeartMath have suggested that the heart's electromagnetic field carries information about emotional states and coherence. Researchers have observed correlations between heart-focused attention and measurable changes in physiological markers. Interpretations vary, but the practical takeaway: bringing attention to the heart-body changes your felt experience and can increase the space before reaction. 3. The past looper. Sign: you replay conversations, mistakes, or hurts as if rehearsing an old movie, and the replay dictates today's choices. Image: lying awake, you turn a meeting over like a Rubik's Cube, examining angles and self-condemnations. Past error becomes the filter for present opportunity. Micro-practice. Source tracking journal. Each evening for 10 minutes, open a jot pad. Pick one repetitive thought or fear that showed up that day. Ask 3 questions beside it. When did this first appear? What early memory does this resemble? Who else held this belief? Then write one sentence reframing the thought from the perspective of the present. That was then, this is now, because. Close by circling one practical step to test whether the thought applies now. Time frame: 10 minutes nightly for 14 days. Indicator of change. The emotional charge around old memories shrinks. When the same scenario repeats, you find a new experimental response rather than a replay. Small real-world tests, calling someone back, raising a hand in a meeting, become evidence that the past looping script is not absolute. Why this matters. Many recurring thoughts are sourced from learning, conditioning from childhood, formative relationships, and cultural scripts. Tracking the origin weakens their authority. It's not a denial of pain. It's a simple forensic process. Identify where the thought came from and test whether it still holds jurisdiction over your choices. 4. The collective receiver. Sign. You feel tuned to public moods, outrage, optimism, scarcity. Social media posts hit you like weather. Image. Scrolling late at night. Your mood rises and falls with headlines and comment threads. Sometimes the day's ambient anxiety becomes your own, without a clear internal cause. Micro-practice. Evening categorization. Each night, before sleep, write 3 headlines or media items you consumed that day. Next to each, write the primary emotional tone you felt: fear, hope, envy, curiosity. Then add a 1-sentence boundary. I choose to carry only what I verify in my direct life. Finally, do a 2-minute breath-centered reset. Inhale to the count of 4, exhale to the count of 6, imagining a filter between your ears that lets in information but screens emotional contagion. Time frame: 10 minutes nightly for 7 days. Indicator of change. You begin to notice which moods originate outside you. Social content drifts past rather than sticking. Decisions revert to direct evidence in your life rather than to the day's viral narrative. Why this matters. The collective field, culture, media, and social networks broadcast patterns of attention that can feel like psychic weather. Some studies have suggested that groups focusing collectively can influence measurable systems more than chance would predict. Interpretations vary. Practically, the evening categorization dissociates you from passive absorption and restores choice about what emotions you allow to inform your day. Mini-hook. If any of those landed like a recognition, if you heard yourself in the overthinker or the collective receiver, stay. The next 3 archetypes map to identity, frequency, and integration. They are where the deeper, steady shifts show up. A moment of context. Before we press on, pause to consider a simple model of how thoughts arise and why they often feel authoritative. Imagine your mind as a prediction machine, constantly guessing what will come next based on past inputs. That machine is efficient. Without it, you'd have to relearn how to balance, move, speak. But predictions are not always accurate, and they often carry the weight of outdated patterns. Awareness is the platform where predictions are noticed. The shift we're talking about is learning to live from the platform instead of from the predictions. This is not a denial of the intellect. The intellect is a tool. The issue is identification, when tool becomes tyrant. The practices I'm giving you are simple because simple is verifiable. They produce small, testable markers, a half-second pause before a reply, a journal entry that shows fewer triggers, a friend commenting that you sound calmer. These are the measurable breadcrumbs that tell you the system is shifting. A short verification experiment. 2 minutes you can do standing or sitting. Place both feet flat. Feel the contact with the floor and find 3 sensations: the breath at the nostrils, the weight in the feet, and the temperature of your hands. Throughout 2 minutes, whenever a sentence arises, I have to, I forgot, what now? Label it thinking and return to the sensations. Notice if sensations become the reference point rather than the sentences.
That somatic reorientation is a reliable lever toward non-identification. Why the shift feels urgent. You're late only if you measure lateness by noticing. The cultural machinery, productivity narratives, hustle, identity branding has spent decades convincing minds to self-identify with output and story. The shift is simply a recalibration toward presence. That recalibration doesn't require permission. It requires practice. There is social urgency because groups that notice this early can influence systems more gently than those who remain caught in automaticity. A person who habitually responds from awareness tends to create different social dynamics, fewer reactive escalations, more thoughtful boundaries, and different priorities. Those small differences, when aggregated, can change workplace cultures, families, and communities. That's not metaphysical hyperbole. It's a practical observation about how behavior ripples. A short caution. When you start practicing, you will not suddenly become flawless. You will find old programs still running. That is part of the data. Be curious, not punitive. The tests I've given are tools for inquiry. Track results with a journal. Use real-world markers. Keep expectations measured. If you struggle with severe distress at any point, seek professional support. Mini-hook. The next archetype falls at the heart of energetic identity, what I call the frequency anchor. If you feel like your baseline mood is a constant, unchanging tone, that archetype is the one that will help you attune. Here is where the first part shifts into the deeper architecture of identity. The remaining archetypes, the frequency anchor, the identity clinger, and the integrator, each map to more sustained protocols and longer timelines. They carry the work from quick micro-practices into a structured pathway you can follow for weeks. We'll begin that pathway now. 5. The frequency anchor. Sign. You carry a baseline mood like a radio station set on low volume, frequency, steady, familiar, and usually unremarkable. Image. You wake up with a general coloring, mild anxiety, a steady low-grade hopefulness, or a persistent numbness that colors the day. It feels like you were born with this channel on. Micro-practice. Heart-body coherence. Twice daily, schedule 10 minutes. Sit upright. Place your attention between your chest and belly. Breathe at a slower rhythm. Inhale 4 seconds. Exhale 6 seconds.
For the full 10 minutes, each time a thought arises, label it thinking and return to the heart-belly rhythm. At minute 5, make a small acknowledgement sentence to yourself, I am here, without elaboration. Time frame, 10 minutes twice daily for 21 days. Indicator of change. Your baseline mood shifts subtly. You'll notice shorter durations of low or high spikes. Your day-to-day emotional variance narrows into a steadier, more resilient tone. Friends may say you seem more present or easier to be around. Why this matters. Practices that engage heart-focused attention have been associated, in some studies, with shifts in autonomic markers and a sense of coherence. Researchers at institutions like HeartMath have observed physiological changes in coherence metrics during heart-focused practices. Interpretations vary. The value here is practical. Sustained attention to the heart-breath rhythm recalibrates the nervous system's default, giving awareness more influence over habitual affective tones. 6. The identity clinger. Sign. You feel defined by roles, stories, or labels. I am the anxious one. I am the failure. I am the achiever. And you polarize around them. Image. In conversations, you defend the identity before it is even challenged. You buy products, choose jobs, and shape relationships in service of a label that feels safer than being unknown. Micro-practice, identity inventory. Once per week, for 30 minutes, make a 2-column list. Left column, labels I carry. Right column, evidence that this is immutable. For each label, write 2 instances that contradict the label, tiny counterexamples from your life. Then write a 1-line experiment to test the label in the coming week. Example, label, I'm not creative. Contradictory evidence, I cooked a new recipe that friends loved. I fixed a glitch at work with a novel approach. Experiment, today I will create for 20 minutes without outcome focus. Time frame, 30 minutes weekly for 6 weeks. Indicator of change. You'll discover more fluidity in self-description. Old labels no longer command decisions. Instead, you choose actions that test hypotheses about who you are. That curiosity undermines the tyranny of fixed identity. Why this matters. Identity clinging narrows perception and limits options. An inventory approach turns identity into a hypothesis you can test rather than a verdict you must obey. It's a shift from being judged by a label to experimenting with capacities. 7. The integrator. Sign. You want practices to be woven into life, not separate rituals, but you often feel stuck translating insights into consistent action. Image. After a retreat or a book, you return to ordinary life and find the bright edges of change dulled by routine. You long for integration that lasts. Micro-practice. Reality response journal. Each morning and evening for 30 days, note 1 intention and 1 observed response. Morning. Set a micro-intention. I will pause before responding to emails. Evening. Record any observable shifts. I paused twice. Emails took longer to resolve, but my tone stayed calmer. Use these entries to track trends. Circle 3 small wins each week. Time frame. 5 minutes morning plus 5 minutes evening for 30 days. Indicator of change, the world starts mirroring different choices. Small synchronicities begin to cluster. Conversations open up. Timing aligns unexpectedly. Those are not mystical promises. They are emergent patterns resulting from different behaviors and different attentional stances. Why this matters? Integration is the long game. The integrator practice connects inner shifts with outer behavior. It creates feedback loops that help you test whether living from awareness changes outcomes. An invitation to experiment. You now have 7 archetypes with clear, time-bound micro-practices. Pick one that rings true. If 2 or 3 do, prioritize the one that creates the largest friction point in your life, where friction equals opportunity. Commit to the time frames I gave. Measure, journal, and treat your progress as a series of experiments. A brief note on evidence and interpretation. When I reference experiments, Libet-style findings, heart-math coherence studies, or collective focus experiments, I'm pointing to converging streams that suggest the mind is not a unitary conductor of every moment. These studies are suggestive. Interpretations vary. Use them as context, not as the final authority. Your practice is the authority because it gives you direct first-person data. What you might notice in the first week. Expect small, uneven changes. You might get frustrated at the lack of dramatic transformation. This is normal. The nervous system and your social environment push back. Old patterns are stable because they've been practiced. Look for micro-indicators, a half-second pause before a reply, a thought labeled and dismissed without escalation, an evening journal entry that shows fewer triggers. Those small changes are the earliest proof that something is shifting. A short experiment you can do in the next 60 seconds. If you have a partner or friend near you, ask them to speak a neutral line. We need to talk about plans. Before you respond, notice the impulse to generate a story, to defend, or to predict. Now breathe and count to 3. If you were practicing the prepared reactor anchor, that count will often redirect the automatic script. If you're alone, imagine a line someone would say and notice the same pacing. The key measure is whether counting produces even a small difference in your habitual reply. A word on social dynamics. As you privately shift, public relations may strain. People who have long relied on your automaticity, your predictability, your reflexive reactivity, might interpret your new pauses as standoffishness or change. That's a normal transitional friction. The practice here is candidness. Explain to those close to you, I'm experimenting with pausing so I can respond more thoughtfully. Many will appreciate it, some will resist. Use your journal to track the social feedback and calibrate how you share your process. Protocol 1. The 7-Day Thought Labeling Sprint. Purpose: create immediate reflective distance from habitual thinking and establish labeling as a default response. Why 7 days? Neural and behavioral repetition builds a habit loop that is easy enough to sustain and long enough to produce measurable change. Day-by-day structure. Day 1. Baseline and curiosity. For 5 minutes in the morning, sit quietly and simply label thinking for whatever arises, no commentary. After the 5 minutes, write one sentence about what you noticed, where thoughts clustered, what tone dominated. Day 2 through 3, categorization. Continue 5 minutes each morning. Add 2 micro-labels beyond thinking. Story for narratives about identity, worry for fear-based projections. After the practice, note one trigger that produced a labeled thought. Day 4 through 5, extension into activity. Keep the 5-minute morning labeling. During one high-friction moment in the day, a stressful email, a tense interaction, name the thought out loud with a single word, story, worry, planning, and step back. At evening, journal one instance where naming interrupted escalation. Day 6. Integration. Maintain the morning 5 minutes. Experiment with labeling in a neutral conversation. Notice whether your tone changes. Day 7. Measure. Keep the morning practice. In your journal, answer 3 questions. How often did I label today? Where did labeling create a measurable gap? And what is one behavioral shift I can test next week? What to log: duration of labeling practice, number of labels used, and one concrete situational marker, e.g., I paused once during a heated Slack message, and subjective intensity of the feeling before and after, scale 1 to 10. These numbers are your data. Over 7 days, you will usually see a rise in the number of labels applied and a decrease in subjective intensity of repeated thoughts. Protocol 2. The Awareness Anchor Schedule. 21-day heart-body coherence. Purpose: shift baseline affect and give awareness embodied footholds that slow reactivity. Why 21 days? Longer-form embodied practices recalibrate autonomic habits and create a more durable window for presence. Daily structure. Morning session, 10 minutes. Sit upright, feet grounded. Place attention between chest and belly. Breathe 4 in, 6 out. For minute 1, simply settle. For minutes 2 through 9, label thoughts as they arise with a single word: thinking, reacting, planning. At minute 5, offer a neutral acknowledgement to yourself: I am here. On minute 10, open your eyes slowly and note one moment where your posture feels different. Midday micro-anchor, 2 through 3 minutes. During a natural break, between meetings or after lunch, place one hand on heart, one on belly, and breathe 4-6 for 3 cycles. Name the dominant feeling in one word and return to task. Evening integration, 5 minutes. Before bed, review 3 moments where you used the anchor. Note what changed in tone or tempo.
What to log: session adherence, yes or no, number of midday micro-anchors taken, and qualitative note on emotional variance that day. Was mood steadier, spikier, and any social feedback? Someone commented you seemed calmer. Heart-focused practices have been associated in some research with changes in coherence metrics. Interpretations vary. Use these findings as contextual support, not proof. Your journal is the proof. Protocol 3. The 30-day Reality Response Journal. Purpose: connect internal shifts to observable outcomes, decisions, timing, relational tone, small synchronicities, so you can test whether changing your attentional stance affects what you notice and what happens next. Why 30 days? A month is long enough to collect trend data and short enough to remain practical. Morning entry, 2 to 3 minutes. Set one micro intention for the day. Make it specific and observable. I will pause 3 breaths before replying to emails, or I will ask one clarifying question in the meeting. Evening entry, 3 to 5 minutes. Record what happened. Note whether you kept the intention, what you observed as a response in the environment, and any internal shifts. Circle one small win and one hypothesis to test tomorrow. Weekly synthesis, 10 minutes once per week. Look back over 7 morning-evening pairs. Count the number of times you met your intention. Write one paragraph summarizing trends. How to assess reality shifts. Look for clusters of correlated changes, not single events that can be easily attributed to chance. Examples of measurable markers: increased time between stimulus and response, more invitations or unexpected confirmations, a client saying let's move forward within 48 hours of a differently phrased email, relationships where conversations feel less escalatory. These are patterns, not guarantees. 7-phase identity reconstruction. Purpose: turn identity into a testable, revisable set of propositions rather than a fixed verdict. This protocol is especially targeted at the identity clinger, but benefits every archetype because identity colors perception. Phase 1. Inventory. Collect labels, roles, stories. Do this with curiosity, not judgment. Spend 30 minutes listing what you call yourself and why. Phase 2. Evidence gathering. For each label, write 2 instances that contradict it. Collect concrete data. This reduces the label's impermeability. Phase 3. Hypothesis formation. Treat each label as a testable hypothesis. Write an experiment you can do to see whether the label holds in a new context. Phase 4. Small experiments. Run the experiments. 20 minutes of creative activity, applying for a role you feel unqualified for, asking a different question in a meeting, and log outcomes. Phase 5. Feedback calibration. Share selected experiments with trusted people and solicit non-evaluative feedback. Use the information not as moral judgment, but as data.
Phase 6. Narrative rewriting. Craft short present tense statements that reflect what experiments actually show. Replace "I am the anxious one" with "I notice anxiety when certain patterns appear. I can respond differently." Phase 7. Iteration. Repeat the cycle monthly. Identity is not a single rewrite, it is continual calibration. Each phase has a time-bound action. Inventory, 30 minutes. Evidence, 2 hours across the week. Hypothesis, 30 minutes. Experiments, 4 20-minute sessions. Feedback, 1 30-minute conversation. Narrative, 15 minutes. Iteration, monthly check. Measuring progress. What counts as data? There are 3 categories of evidence to watch for. 1. Internal markers, the half-second pause before responding, the ability to label without escalation, reduced subjective intensity of recurring thoughts. 2. Behavioral markers, number of times you intentionally pause in conversations, number of experiments attempted, variance in daily mood measured in your journal. 3. External feedback, remarks from others, you seem calmer, changes in outcomes, different meeting results, and emergent patterns, e.g. repeated opportunities that align with your micro-intentions. Keep these simple. For internal markers, use a 1 to 10 subjective scale each evening. For behavioral markers, track frequency counts. For external feedback, collect qualitative quotes or account of observed outcomes. Over weeks, you'll be able to see trends. Quality control. Design experiments with falsifiability. If your micro-intention is "I will pause before replying," measure whether you paused, not whether the reply received a positive response. If your hypothesis is "labeling reduces reactivity," count episodes of escalation versus non-escalation. This keeps the practice empirical and prevents wishful interpretation. How to handle setbacks and social friction. Data rarely moves in a straight line. Old systems reassert themselves with the same stubbornness that created them. Expect days where labeling feels impossible, where the anchor fizzles, where people become puzzled by your new pauses. That is all data. If social friction arises, use the journal and simple communication. A brief line, "I'm experimenting with pausing so I can respond more thoughtfully," often reduces confusion. For closer relationships, schedule a short conversation and invite them to observe how the change affects joint dynamics for 2 weeks. Ask for specific feedback. If resistance persists, log it as an outcome and design a test. Try pausing in a different context, try a different phrasing, or temporarily scale back to see how social dynamics recalibrate. A measured note on research and interpretation. I've referenced experiments like those of Benjamin Libet, work by groups such as HeartMath, and studies where focused collective attention has been observed to correlate with deviations in random systems.
Researchers have observed that preparatory neural signals can precede conscious awareness of an intention. Some interpret these findings to suggest that conscious awareness is often posterior to certain brain processes. Heart-focused practice has been associated with shifts in coherence metrics in controlled settings. Studies on collective focus are suggestive and contested. Interpretations vary and methods differ. Use these references as supportive context, a set of converging observations that make the practices plausible, not as definitive metaphysical proof. What matters is first-person verification. Run the tests. Log the results. Let your experience be the final arbiter. A practical, granular 30-day plan. If you want a structured path that ties everything together, here's a clear month plan you can follow. It blends the 3 signature protocols with the identity reconstruction phases and the reality response journal. Week 1. Clear foundation. Begin the 7-day thought labeling sprint and start the reality response journal morning, evening entries. Day 1 includes a baseline marker entry in the journal. First marker equals what you noticed. Week 2, embodiment and testing. Add the awareness anchor schedule. 10 minutes morning, 3-minute midday micro anchors. Continue labeling and journaling. Run 2 identity experiments based on inventory from week 1. Week 3, integration and extension. Maintain labeling and anchors. Begin weekly synthesis on the reality response journal. Conduct 1 social feedback conversation. Week 4, consolidation and measurement. Continue practices daily. Review journal trends. Write a 1-page summary, what changed, what didn't, and design 3 new hypotheses for the next 30 days. Daily time commitment, morning 5 to 10 minutes, midday 3 minutes, evening 5 minutes. Weekly time for synthesis and identity inventory, 30 to 45 minutes. Total average per day, 15 to 20 minutes. The simplicity is intentional. Sustainable practices outlast heroic bursts. How reality shifts look in practice. Non-grandiose examples. Shift does not usually mean dramatic, immediate wealth or miraculous cures. It shows up as clusters of different outcomes. A client who has been non-committal suddenly clarifies. A recurring argument that loses its intensity. A sequence of small openings. An email response time that aligns with a new phrasing you experimented with. In career settings, people report noticing timing changes, calls, invites, or resources showing up after a sequence of clearer communications. In relationships, partners report fewer escalations and more curiosity. These are emergent patterns, amplified by altered behavior and attention, not magical guarantees. Short vignette to illustrate, composite, anonymized. A freelance designer stuck in a scarcity loop tried the reality response journal with a micro intention, ask 3 new people about a collaborative project this week.
She paused before sending outreach, tweaked the language from defensive to curious, and logged responses. Within 2 weeks, she received 1 warm referral, an invitation to pitch, and 2 useful critiques that led to a better proposal. She couldn't attribute the sequence solely to the journaling, but the practice shaped her behavior, language, and timing, which in turn influenced the responses she received. Verification experiments you can do today.
You've already done the 60-second and 30-second label tests earlier. Here are two compact experiments to try right now, each designed to be self-validating. Experiment A, the pause test. Imagine a neutral sentence a stranger could say to you. We need to talk about plans. Before you answer, breathe 4 counts in, 6 counts out, and then speak. Did the tone of your reply change? Log what changed and give it a subjective rating. Experiment B, the evidence sampling. For the next 2 days, whenever a recurring thought arises, label it and write 1 line of evidence that supports it and 1 line that contradicts it. At the end of 2 days, count the contradictions. This simple sampling often reveals that recurring thoughts have weaker evidentiary support than we assume. These are small experiments, designed to be replicated easily. The key is to track, not to judge. How to choose which archetype to prioritize. If more than one archetype resonates, ask, where is the largest friction in my life? Which practice will most reliably create a measurable behavioral change this week? If overthinking steals your mornings, start with the 7-day sprint. If social media moods override you, begin the evening categorization. If identity feels like the governor on every choice, commit to the identity inventory and weekly experiments. Prioritize the practice that addresses the tightest knot first. You can layer practices gradually. Once the initial knot loosens, add the next protocol. Tools and supports. The single resource that ties these protocols together is the Reality Response Journal template, an easy downloadable that provides morning intention prompts, evening reflection fields, weekly synthesis pages, and quick identity inventory sheets. Use it to standardize your data. If you prefer digital tools, a simple notes app with dedicated tags will do. #intention, #response, #marker. A note about humility and curiosity. New ways of noticing can feel precious. Resist 2 temptations, declaring yourself awake as a fixed state and seeking extraordinary confirmation for ordinary experiments. Curious, humble practice is both more sustainable and more effective. Hold the stance of a scientist with tenderness. Observe without turning observation into a moral score. Celebrate micro-wins. Treat setbacks as data, not as disproof. Safety and boundaries. These practices are safe for most people. They are low-risk attentional methods. If you have a history of trauma, severe anxiety, or other mental health conditions, consider working with a clinician who can integrate these practices within a therapeutic frame. None of this is a substitute for professional care when needed. A final guided recognition: feel it now. Sit comfortably if you can. Ground your feet. Soften your gaze. Bring attention to the breath. For the next 20 to 30 seconds, let thoughts arise without chasing them. Each time a thought appears, say silently or aloud, "thinking," and gently return attention to the breath's entrance at the nostrils. If your mind wanders, that's normal. Label and return. Notice whether there is a space, a slight aperture between the arising of the thought and the place that names it. If you felt that gap, even for a fraction of a second, that gap is evidence. It's where practice begins. When the 30 seconds finish, open your eyes. Take 1 line to record in your journal. Recognition marker. What I noticed. That line is your first repeated datum. A parting practical map. If you want a minimum viable path to sustain momentum, choose 1 archetype, apply its micro-practice daily for the recommended time frame, keep the Reality Response Journal morning and evening, and run the 7-day sprint at least once in the first month. Reassess at 30 days. What changed? What evidence shows a shift in behavior, tone, or outcomes? If you want deeper identity work, add the 7-phase reconstruction in parallel with the 30-day journal. A final frame on urgency. The phrase from the title stands as both provocation and compassion. The 7 who feel the shift. If this finds you, you're already late. Late to the noticing, perhaps, but not late to practice. There is no cutoff where change becomes impossible. There is only advantage in early adoption. You move first, you iterate faster, you create different habits earlier, and those habits compound. The urgency is practical, not apocalyptic. It's about recalibrating how you allocate your attention and how you anchor your identity. Download the Reality Response Journal template in the description below to get a ready-made structure. Morning intentions, evening observations, weekly synthesis prompts, and identity inventory pages. If you want to deepen this into a guided 30-day challenge with daily prompts, subscribe and I'll send the series. One last thing before we close. You can do everything in small increments. The practices cumulatively reshape the space you live in, the sky of awareness where clouds of thought pass. Over days and weeks, the clouds thin, not because you force them away, but because you stop mistaking them for the ground. Remember the rule of evidence. Track, test, repeat. If you do that faithfully, the gap you noticed in the first minute will widen into a new operating posture. You'll still have thoughts, you'll still have moods.
The difference is that you will be the place where they occur, rather than the voice that is taken for the author. The 7 who feel the shift, those archetypes are not fixed identities, they are entry points. If this finds you, you're late only to noticing. The work begins now with honesty and curiosity. Practice the small experiments, keep the journal, and let the results teach you. You are not your thoughts. You never were. If this finds you, you're already late, but not too late to start.